Alexei, you have, okay, yeah, Guangya is also there.
Yeah.
I think we can start.
Sure.
Yeah, I am not sure who did put this about. Do we need to highlight some status first for some important projects? Uh, if whoever has put this as an agenda item, I would need
Here,
to know that.
so yeah, I put
Okay.
it here because I'm just wondering. I think that maybe it's better that we can first have a think up about what others doing now, so that we can on the same picture about those products in Federation too. Yeah.
You mean to say the specific items individuals are handling as of now?
Yeah, because I think that every member may have some products on hand, so I hope that we can have a sync up on this, so that everybody can have a clear picture for what others is doing now, so that we can collaborate more easily, I think.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I can start with myself. So the task that I undertook a month or so ago was to implement all the scheduling types, and the identified scheduling types were replica sets, deployments, uh, jobs, and HPA. So I'm somewhere in between implementation of the jobs as a scheduling type, a higher level scheduling type, and I should be able to finish that probably this week sometime. I'm somewhere implementing test cases for that.
Cool. Great. Okay, so yeah, so perhaps I can give some update about my part. So currently, I was working on 2 design documents. So the first one that I was working with Alex from IBM, and we want to do the product of Federation Read, which can enable that we can get resources across different clusters. So this is the first document, but currently we don't have too much progress about this one. So, but we hope that we can have more detail in this week, so that we can get it reviewed in next week. And another product that I'm doing now is that I'm doing the Federation V2 pool design, and I have put the design here. I hope that we can have some review today, and I already got some review comments from Paul and from Maru, and I also have some discussion with Irfan today, and he also gives me some very good comments. So I hope that we can go through the document today. Yeah. Thank you.
Actually, before going to the review, and this Alexei, by the way, actually before going to the review in the next week with remote ride, would like to get some comments on the document so we can answer or update it. It would be very useful.
Okay. Yeah.
Which document?
I can put link to the document in the agenda.
You're talking about the read?
Yeah, Federation Read. Let me.
Have there been substantive changes since last week?
Guangya, I think that was a question for you.
Yeah.
Alexei, Guangya, either of you.
Alex add more option there, and yeah, let me post the link in the document.
And by the way, my question is, you know, I'm new here in this group and the multi-cluster C group. Is it should be part of the federation work, or it should be part of just multi-cluster like distributed lead operation or management operations?
That's something that is TBD. It'll depend on, I guess, the design discussion.
Thank you.
Shashi, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, regarding the work I have been doing, actually I was working for past week on federated ingress. So I think I put up a issue on which I was working on. So, and also related to like DNS programming delegation to external DNS currently. So that I have taken. It's in progress, not active though. Yeah.
Maru, Ivan, you want to update also?
Sorry, I had a quick question about Shashi's PR. I couldn't help noticing it was an enormous amount of code to presumably just propagate ingresses to the underlying clusters. Did I misunderstand the PR, or is that how much code is required? I thought it was just
I
a
think,
configuration change.
Yeah, bulk of it is auto-generated.
Oh, I saw the obviously auto-generated stuff, ZZ, etc. But there's a lot of stuff there that's not obviously auto-generated. Okay. How does one work out what is and what isn't auto-generated?
Oh, I think it's easy to through if you go through the commits. So I think the amount of code I added is very little.
Oh, okay. I'll look at the individual commits. I presume the auto-generated stuff goes in independently of your manual.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I'll do that. Thanks.
Thank you.
For myself, I'm focused on enabling Federation control plane to run in an arbitrary namespace. And the goal is to allow Federation to run in a single namespace and target a single namespace. This isn't going to be the default, so this isn't going to change behavior for anybody who's expecting it to continue to be a global for a given cluster and hosting cluster. But the intention here is to reduce the cost of trying it out so that potentially you could use it on the cluster that you actually value, and installing alpha software in a namespace with restricted permissions, giving it restricted permissions to a target namespace seemed like potentially a good way to accomplish that. So there's already one PR up, there'll be more coming. Like I said, it's not really any functional change, it's just an operational change.
Oh, so one question. So do we have some plan to put the clusters into different namespaces? Because currently all the clusters will belong to one namespace, the Federation namespace. And this may be difficult to do some RBAC process for clusters.
Which clusters are you speaking of? Federated clusters or cluster registry clusters?
Federated cluster.
So federated clusters are already namespaced and are already in the Federation system namespace. The work I'm doing allows that namespace to be configurable so that Federation control plane could be provided an arbitrary namespace in which it would store cluster details.
Yeah, but I think that with the design, we still have one namespace to host all the Federation clusters. So my question is it possible that we have multiple namespaces and every namespace will have different Federation clusters? So this can make sure that we,
I think certainly possible. I'm focusing on restricting it to a single namespace.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the simplest possible next step. If there are use cases that suggest people want to do that, that certainly is technically feasible. Do you have specific use cases in mind that would suggest that?
Yeah, because currently I didn't find a good way of how to do RBAC for the Federation clusters within one namespace. So because with one namespace, if the user can access the resources in the Federation namespace, and then it will be able to manage all the Federation clusters.
I think that my focus is on simply allowing the control plane to be isolated. that opens up the possibility of, you know, a tenant in a multi-tenant cluster running their own federation control plane, rather than allowing a single control plane to selectively propagate to different clusters per tenant. Like, I'm not saying that's not doable, but that's complicated. I'm just trying to make it so that people can try this thing out. Because we need feedback. And if we find some of the feedback is that a more multi-tenant capable scenario is really desirable, then we can pursue that. But I don't think we have any user feedback suggesting that quite yet.
Okay.
Maru, just for my own education, so is what you're doing essentially making the namespaces that the various pieces of the Federation control plane run in configurable, and then giving credentials to the Federation control plane that are restricted to a particular namespace? Is that basically what you're doing?
Yeah, that's basically it. Then the additional detail would be that the clusters, like, it would affect join, so that rather than join giving like cluster admin access to the member cluster, it would target a specific namespace and give admin on that namespace only.
But so join you don't provide a key with join, right? Or you do?
Join, like, the behavior wouldn't be like in terms of authorization. You'd still have to have privileges to be able to create a necessary service account in the underlying cluster. It's just, it wouldn't go and grant a cluster admin service account, which would be potentially dangerous if this was a production cluster while we're still like in alpha. So by restricting to a single namespace, they could give a throwaway namespace or one where they weren't running like production workloads and experiment with federation.
Yeah, no, I totally understand the goal. I guess I'm just not clear on, maybe I just need to go and have a look at how it works today. It seemed very straightforward. You would just give it credentials that only had access to the namespace you wanted it to have access to, and then you would have achieved that. But maybe it's more complicated than that.
I think you're right. I don't think it's more complicated than that. It's just sort of changing the workflow so that there's a namespace involved. So yeah, I think you're largely...
Okay, cool. Yeah. Just want to make sure I wasn't totally confused. Thank you.
That's it for me. Ivan, do you want to...
Yeah, Maru, and then there was an alternative idea like watch only the particular namespaces, like the federated informer. Right now, for all the controllers, right, it watches all the namespaces and try to propagate to all the namespaces. So maybe we could restrict it to a certain namespace. Yeah, we couldn't do it for like multiple namespaces, but a single namespace, we could make it configurable. So do you think like your work is involved with that?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that there'll only be propagation between a single namespace in the host cluster to the namespace in the underlying clusters. And that namespace would be determined either as part of join or just implicitly because of the mode the control plane is running in. But I don't actually think there's anything to preclude targeting multiple namespaces. I think that the way informers work is you can just provide a list of namespaces they're going to target. It just has to be namespaces that they have access to. So first pass will be a single namespace. If it proves useful, then we can extend it. But the goal initially is just to get something as simple as possible into people's hands.
Okay. Yeah, because yeah, there may be some ways. I'm not sure. Like list function and watch function, they do take a single keyword for namespace watching, I believe. I don't know if there is any trick to watch multiple namespaces.
reason I think there is, like I've had experience watching other resources where you want to be selective, and I'm pretty sure it's possible to like have a slice of namespaces or something like that. But I could be wrong, in which case it would just be more complicated. You'd have to have a single, sorry, you'd have to have like an informer per namespace, which would be kind of a pain, but doable.
Okay, okay.
Any other questions about that? No, okay.
Nope. Yep.
Ivan, did you want to update?
Sure. Yeah, so probably most recently, I've been working on some of the testing side of things. Most recently, the E2E testing infrastructure had been sort of running a duplicate set of tests with integration tests. And we needed to start running against a real cluster just so that we can have some of the actual Kube controllers running in place. So some of the work there just involved setting up a Minikube cluster and running the E2E tests, which we call unmanaged, by providing a kube config. It'll actually run against the Minikube cluster that's set up. And that Minikube cluster relies on running without a VM driver, which effectively sets up a Kubernetes cluster outside of a virtual machine. And that's necessary in order to run within Travis, as there's no support for like nested virtualization. So right now it's only running against a single cluster. I had done a bit of investigation on various solutions that we could do. At some point, I looked into like Test Infra with their Docker and Docker solution. I had looked at Nkube. I had looked at the Kube ADM Docker and Docker cluster as well. And the Test Infra and Kube ADM Docker and Docker cluster didn't really prove to be mature enough yet to support multiple clusters. Recently, Kube ADM Docker and Docker cluster does support multiple clusters, but there are still some gotchas around like networking and being able to access one cluster from the other. So right now, we have at least a single cluster that we're testing against in the, and it's part of a CI job. When you create a PR or submit any changes, it will run the integration test and the E2E test against that single Minikube cluster. So I think that's good enough for now, and we will look at revisiting that once there's better support for multiple clusters. And of course, this is multiple clusters running, as part of some dev workflow. This isn't trying to use a public cloud provider infrastructure or anything like that yet. I don't know if we'll get there, but at least for now, this will work. And so probably like later this week or early next week, I'll probably be looking at taking on something else now that the majority of that work is complete.
Ivan, if I can just chime in, yeah, thank you very much for doing this stuff. It's super valuable. So if I understand correctly, the end goal is to have multiple Minikube clusters running on the same machine, simulating multiple real clusters, and then be able to actually run tests across multiple Minikube clusters, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, that's the goal. But unfortunately, Minikube, running a cluster outside of a virtual machine, it doesn't currently support more than one cluster, or profile, which is what they call it. It's a flag that you can provide. And so we're sort of stuck to one cluster right now. And it may be that the test infra solution, which they're actually working on to try and get possibly just a Docker and Docker solution and some management capabilities outside of that, it could be the next possible solution we could look to support multiple clusters. I'm not sure that I'm not sure who will get there first, but currently Minikube doesn't support it.
Okay. No, the reason for my question is from historical experience, yeah, running real clusters is just extremely expensive, and to do proper testing, you need many of them, and sometimes they need many nodes in each one, etc. So this is super valuable, but at the moment, given that we're restricted to a single cluster, it sort of restricts our ability. We are called SIG multi-cluster after all, and we need to run tests that actually span multiple clusters, many of them anyway. Do you have a sense of sort of how, if we just wait for other people to develop the support, how long we're going to have to wait, and is it worth making some sort of interim plan, like maybe running 2 VMs, each with a Minikube cluster in it? I don't know if that's feasible and if it's easy, but some sort of interim plan until there's a better plan available.
Yeah, if we wanted to run, Minikube will definitely support multiple clusters in virtual machines, but we would have to pick a different CI infrastructure to run it on. Just simply because Travis doesn't support nested virtualization. So we're only given one virtual machine, and we can't spawn further virtual machines within that virtual machine. So we would have to look at
one physical. We can't spin those up, like those virtual machines up somewhere else. Other than in Travis.
Yeah, it's possible we could, but we'd have to get some hooks in to support. Yeah, we'd have to get some hooks in. We'd have to have maybe some machines that are already up and running, or we'd have to wherever we spin them up though, that could also add to costs, right? Like I guess you're imagining spinning something up on like a public cloud provider's infrastructure.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to create busy work. Ultimately, if the other solutions pan out at some point, then this is wasted effort. So I wouldn't want to make it a huge amount of effort, but I also wouldn't want us to not have multi-cluster tests until some indeterminate period in the future. We've had bad experiences in the past waiting for other projects to get to some level of maturity, which in some cases either never happens or takes a very long time. So I'm sort of inclined to try and put a quick fix in place until that support is provided. And I'm just wondering how difficult that would be and what options we have there.
Yeah, so I was very eager to try and get multiple clusters, just simply for that same reason, right? It's like it's not a super valuable test until we have multiple clusters in place. The quick solution was just to enable single cluster for now, just because that's better than no clusters at all and running against just like spawn processes to simulate clusters. So it would potentially have to involve more investigation and think about what we want to do if we wanted a solution now. It might be that we end up using something like Travis and spawning virtual machines in some other cloud provider. It would probably be more affordable than spawning actual clusters, which have multiple virtual machines backing them. So that could be an alternative we could look at.
Yeah, and then depending on how big these things, I mean, they could be like tiny virtual machines, which are almost free. In fact, there are many very small virtual machines that are actually free. Just as an option. And just to clarify, so we do actually have continuous integration multi-cluster tests. They're just not running on real clusters yet. Is that the situation we're in?
Well, it's not running on real multiple clusters, but it is running on a real single cluster.
But I thought you mentioned that we previously had clusters simulated with processes.
Yes.
We run multiple API servers, which for the purposes of federation is like largely the same, because we're not actually testing, like running workloads is Kube's job. Yeah. So if we write to 2 APIs and we can see the controller reconcile between them, that's effectively multiple clusters. Running a real cluster, the main reason that's valuable is that then we have controller interaction that maybe we don't expect. So even the single real cluster like running tests against that gives us some assurance that our assumptions in integration land or so-called managed fixture, that they are largely correct. So I agree with you that we need multiple clusters, but we have kind of, I would say, 90% coverage between fake multiple clusters and one real cluster.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we do actually we are testing our controllers able to handle more than one cluster.
Correct.
But they're not clusters with actual controllers in them. And then we are testing that our control plane can handle a cluster with a real controller in it and get the feedback, whether it's status updates or whatever it needs to get from the other controller. It's just combining the two that we don't quite have yet. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I agree with you. That's quite a long way there. There are a bunch of useful tests that won't work in that environment, but maybe we can live with that for a short while. So just to get back to my original question, Ivan, do you have any guesstimate as to how far away we are from having multiple real clusters if we just sit and wait for Minikube or whoever it is that has to do stuff to get that to work?
Yeah, I can't provide like a concrete date or anything. I do know that Minikube is not actively working on supporting that, but the test info folks, I spoke with people like Ben that are actually actively working on getting a solution for that, and they're interested in that both from a performance standpoint as well as supporting these types of use cases. Ben would share a timeline with me when that code was a little more mature. So at least it will be kind of a asynchronous notification on when that's available, but he didn't have specific dates set yet.
Oh, okay, cool. Maybe we can check in with them in a month or so and see if they have a better idea when it'll be available. Cool.
Yeah, I think so.
So,
Ivan, Maru, you want to go ahead first?
no, go ahead. I can talk after.
Yeah, while we were talking, I thought there's one more mechanism. Like we have an option of cluster local up. There's that's the script name or something like that in K8s. So you download a GitHub K8s GitHub repo, you clone it, and then you can build it and do a local up where it spawns the binaries, the control plane binaries locally. Not in Docker. I don't think they are spawned inside Docker containers also. They are just run as processes. That also effectively provides a real cluster. Did you happen to try that? Like run a Minikube single cluster in the mode that you are running in the Travis VM right now, and then clone K8s repo and do a cluster local up. That might effectively provide us two real clusters, right?
Yeah, that could potentially be something to look at. So Minikube without a VM driver essentially does the same thing by spawning
Yes.
the various processes, within
Correct.
the
Correct.
virtual machine.
There is no direct mechanism in Minikube where we can actually run it in two different, with two different clusters using the same mechanism. But K8s provides a script which can do the similar thing, right? I'm not sure there might be conflicts if they are using same ports or something like that, but it seems like a viable thing to try out, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest, is that there may be some networking gotchas around that, which is partly reasons why Minikube may not have tackled that yet, because they need to be routable to each other. They need to not have conflicting ports and various things like that.
They don't need to be routable to each other. The cluster's API server basically needs to be routable locally. That's it.
Well, like the controller manager needs to be able to access
talk to its own API server
and the API server in the other cluster as well.
So,
no.
There's kind of a catch around this, is that maintaining our own bespoke form of cluster is not necessarily a good equivalent to a real cluster. Ideally, we would be using clusters that were deployed via some standard mechanism like Minikube or KubeADM, just so that we have some assurance that we're keeping up with what people are actually using. So I'm not saying it's not workable. I think, because this is something that's been considered sort of by the SIG testing frameworks working group or whatever it is. And the challenge, I mean, there's still there's an ongoing effort to try to create infrastructure to create real clusters in some sort of easy way. I don't think it's really complete. It's still in process.
Yeah, it has been in process for 4 years now.
No, Maru, I did not mean to suggest that we maintain something, we do some changes and maintain something. I was just curious if somebody has tried it. Maybe it just works without any conflicts, which probably might be a high, I mean, not necessarily possible probability, but maybe I'll give it a try. Maybe, if it works
we're
just
most of the way
out.
there.
Hmm.
Like we're most of the way there with the integration fixture, or I say most of the way, we're part of the way there. I mean, it's managing, etcd, it's managing an API server. There's been some talk about running a control plane, sort of in addition to that. But whenever we start putting significant effort into that, there's always the question of like, why are we creating a parallel like deployment mechanism when there's already existing one? So one thing that I'd put out there, like if we're not satisfied with the rate of progress in these other options, there's one that I have that, I mean, I haven't tried and it didn't really work for him because it has problems running in Minikube, but the N-Cube thing where you basically run cube on cube, I can get it working locally. It doesn't properly work in a Minikube VM because of some networking thing, but the way that we're running it in, like we're running things currently in a Travis VM is not a Minikube VM. So it may be that we should just try that and see if we can get it working. I'm not suggesting this is a long-term ultimate solution because maintenance-wise, it's not exactly my highest priority, but it could be a near-term option until the other better supported options come along.
It makes sense. I did not intend to say that it's like it's something a necessity as of now. I was just curious about if somebody has tried this. Maybe I'll just give it a try myself and then feedback it with what are the problems that I face. And yes, your N-Cube also seems like. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, N-Cube also seems like a good option, but yeah, I do agree that we should not basically burden ourselves with maintaining something which we only are going to be using. Doesn't really make sense.
Sorry, carry on.
Sorry. I was just going to say that, like I said, I think the only concern with a bespoke solution, I think it's entirely workable. You can get something working, I have no doubt. The question is just whether it's worth the cost. Sorry, go ahead, Quentin.
Yeah, I agree with you. We've been down this road before with KubeFed and other things to like build clusters and put them all together, and we don't want to get into that business, I don't think. Just a comment that I think all of these solutions we've been talking about recently are all not real clusters. I mean, they're all mini cubes or some simulated cluster. And I'm not, so I think there's still value in actually running tests against real clusters at some point. And that might be once a month or before each release or something.
Sorry, when you say real clusters, I mean, I think that to me, I think that we should be running on like in clouds at some point, because then there's all kind of infrastructure that, like, especially like around networking, that Federation could take advantage of, like Google Cloud, probably in particular with the load balancer and stuff.
So
but in terms of the actual, like, a KubeADM deployed cluster is effectively a real cluster. Like, the only difference is that the workloads are run in Docker instead of Docker, but everything else is basically exactly what you're going to find in an arbitrary cluster, like not a cloud-specific one.
Okay, but we're not using that yet, right? We're proposing using Minikube.
Right, but Minikube is effectively like a real cluster.
Well, except it doesn't have real nodes.
It has all the pieces that are representative of a cluster.
But it doesn't have real nodes and doesn't actually run containers.
Right, but again, Federation is only interacting with the API. So, I mean, I kind of get it. I shouldn't be fighting against this because you're right. I'm just trying to minimize the cost of testing, but you're right. We should be running.
I totally agree, but I can think of like a dozen reasons. You know, if you run a job in a cluster, you know, the job has actually got to run, the containers have got to run for the job to complete, for you to be able to detect that it's completed. If you don't have any containers, then, you know, you can play with the API all you like and you won't actually see anything.
Right, but I mean, even Minikube can do
that. It can run containers. It can
run a job. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of Minikube, is it's effectively a single node cluster, but it can run workloads. Scheduling across nodes, it doesn't really support, but at present we don't really have any visibility into that in Federation anyway. But that said, I'm not trying to dispute the fact that yes, we need to run real clusters at some point.
Okay, so we're in agreement there. So I guess my question was, so we don't have anything running on real clusters right now, other than anything somebody does manually.
Correct.
Which I think is fine, but I think we need to, at some point, improve on that. And I would propose that we don't even try and go down the route of constructing Kubernetes clusters for ourselves, with or without KubeADM or anything else, simply because in the past we've had so much trouble getting that stuff. You know, it keeps changing. And that maybe a solution is just to pick one or more public cloud providers and use whatever their magic button is that you push to get a Kubernetes cluster, and use those. And I think in the past we've used GKE, just because it happened to be easily available and free at the time, but we could equally well use, you know, Kubernetes on any other public cloud provider, and use that, you know, obviously not for every PR, but maybe weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever the right cadence is to do that, just to verify that it actually works on real clusters.
Does CNCF provide any infrastructure that we could test on?
Not currently, no. I'm pretty sure they could provide some funding. Actually, that's not true. They do have a CI working group, and they do actually run tests. I'm not sure what physical infrastructure it runs on. I believe it runs across all the public clouds. And there's money behind that and or donated resources, because all the public cloud providers are sponsors and members of the CNCF. So that's actually a good avenue. I know those guys quite well. We could find out from them if they would be prepared to run, you know, if we could get our tests to a point where they could run them for us at whatever frequency they do that. I'm pretty sure they could provide all the resources. And that's sort of their function, is to say that, you know, here are all the 27 CNCF projects at versions X, Y, and Z, whatever each project happens to be at, and we've actually tested this version of this project with this other version of this other project on this cloud provider, and it works. And they have CI stuff to do that. So if we added, you know, Federation to that thing, we could say, yes, Federation on these cloud providers against this version of Kubernetes works. And I think they'd be happy to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that would be great.
Awesome. Yeah, I can speak to those, to the CI folks at CNCF.
Guys, I have a slightly different question. We have discussed testing with Minikube versus real clusters. But Federation deployment is a distributed deployment, and one of the clusters can be deployed on with big latency and restricted bandwidth. So we have to take into account these use cases as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are different degrees of testing. You know, at the very basic level, there's obviously end-to-end, or rather unit tests and basic integration tests, and then running against any simple cluster, you know, you could dream up a potentially infinite number of scenarios that one could test. I think the question is figuring out, you know, how to do that and which ones are the most important. I mean, the same goes for Kubernetes end-to-end tests. They could also simulate, you know, slow nodes and fast nodes and slow networks and fast networks, but you can't test all the possible scenarios in which Kubernetes may be deployed.
Yeah, I agree, but you know, there are some tools to simulate these network issues. Maybe we can integrate it in our test infrastructure.
Yeah, that's true. So what we have done fairly successfully in the past is actually write, I wrote quite a lot of these tests in the early days of Kubernetes, which had at the time nothing to do specifically with Federation, but we actually wrote end-to-end tests that specifically injected those kinds of things. So they put bandwidth throttling, IP tables rules in, for example, on the nodes or on the master machine, and then ran tests to verify what happened, or actually sig hupt, or rather actually caused reboots of nodes to see that the control plane could handle a node rebooting, etc. But the code for that was not in the infrastructure. The code for that was actually in end-to-end tests. I'm not saying that's the best way of doing it, but it's very easy to do and it's been done before. So we could take the same approach. So we don't have to go and boil the ocean and come up with, you know, fancy ways to build clusters with low latency or high latency networks, etc. We just put them in end-to-end tests. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So I would encourage you to do that. You can actually go and have a look. The tests I'm referring to are called, I can dig them out if I need to. It was years ago that I wrote them, but they go under a category of fault tolerance or failure case tests or something like that. And there are a whole bunch of them, and they do things like reboot nodes and disconnect networks and slow down networks and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and by the way, I agree with you that it's not a test that we should run for each merge or each pull request, but before releases, it's some kind of additional testings.
Yeah. One of the problems we had in the past was that you couldn't run those in parallel with any other tests, because obviously if you're busy rebooting nodes, then all the other end-to-end tests that are not assuming node reboots will probably fail or time out or whatever. So they are pretty disruptive, and yes, you're right, you can't run them all the time. But automating them is important, so you can run them whenever you need to in a reproducible fashion.
I mean, ultimately, though, we're just interacting with API servers, so reasonably speaking, it's just a matter of introducing arbitrary latency in the client connection, making sure that that's recoverable.
Yeah, I also personally don't see a great value in going for such tests as of now. Probably if we reach beta or some APIs reach to a stage where they can be called GA or something, at that point it might make much more sense to be visiting such tests.
I agree with you, but if anybody is excited about it and has a need from their company to go and build these things, there are lots of people very excited about chaos tests and the likes. They'd be most welcome to go and build these kinds of tests. And I could point them in the right direction to figure out how best to do it.
Cool, yes. Okay, is there anybody remaining? I think we have eaten up most of the time in the updates today. I would actually be interested in, Lindsay, Maru did update that you are looking at the status resource. I would be interested in any update on that if you have.
I've still just been working on it in my my own repo. I haven't gotten very far at this point, but I'm hoping to make some more progress on that today.
Okay, cool. We can iterate over a document or anything that you, or a PR that you publish.
Yep, I will.
Okay, coming to the next point, which was last meeting, we started discussing about the document of federated read access to all the KTS resources. Gwangya, I had a look at your document prior to the meeting.
Yeah.
I saw some updates and I gave some comments also. I would
Oh,
motivate
great.
other guys also to have a look at that. But I still have a feeling that there is a good deal of detail which probably needs to be added in the document. Did
Yeah.
you happen to talk to Paul and Maru as we did discuss in the previous meeting about the alternatives or about the possibilities of implementation for this?
Not yet, but I was mainly talking with Maru and Paul for the Federation V2 pool mode, and we are working on the document together. Yeah, the document that I talked to you today for the pool mode today.
Yeah, I would suggest that you can actually have a sync with either of us. You can actually talk to me also, and then maybe formalize some alternatives,
Okay,
possible implications, and then that is the detail you can reflect in the document.
sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. Otherwise, there is some detail these guys have put in the document, and as I said, I would motivate others also to have a look.
Yeah, possibly. Perhaps I can book a meeting with Maru and Paul, with Alex, and we can have a sync up first for the document.
Yeah, just send an invite to me also. I would also
Okay.
join that.
Okay, sure.
Anybody else
Great.
who's interested can also talk about that. I don't think 10 minutes as of now. We might have talked about that right now, but 10 minutes might not be sufficient for that.
Great. Yeah.
I haven't read the document yet, and I will try and do that today, but just a brief comment that I would strongly encourage you to consider the model where, I mean, in essence, the Federation existing push model is people writing, somebody writing stuff to the API server, and then some controllers reading from the API server, Federation API server, and writing to a cluster API server. And those controllers are not fundamentally tied to running in the Federation control plane. They could run in the destination clusters. So if you just, you know, I'm sort of waving my hands a lot, and I'm sure there's some details that would need to be figured out specifically around auth, etc. But the basic model of just running the, I think we call them propagators in the design document. I'm not sure what they're called in the code right now. Just running, you know, one of those in each cluster, which reads from the Federation API server and writes to its local cluster's API server, is one model which is potentially very simple and may or may not achieve what you want to achieve.
Quinton, I guess you're talking about the pull-based approach, right? The
Yes,
pull-based
sorry, maybe I was looking at the wrong document. Were you guys referring to the read access?
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, there were two documents. I had the full one.
So, yeah, Gwangya, I guess, started, I mean, he took up a couple of weeks ago, he took up the activity of probably proposing a design for read access. We already had a design to some level with some amount of complexity in Federation V1. In V2, that might not be applicable directly. So Gwangya had a link to that, and what he took up was that he with Alexei will try to propose some design with respect to Federation V2 for a similar requirement. And one thing we have already made clear is that it's not necessary that the read access or the or this feature needs to be implemented as part of a Federation V2 API alone. It can be put under the umbrella of multi-cluster and can be implemented as a separate tool or anything. So all the alternatives should be considered.
Yes, makes sense. I'll try and review both of those and add some comments if there's anything useful I can say.
Okay, great. Sounds great.
Okay, so 8 minutes remaining. Does it make sense to start talking about something else, or we stop the meeting here.
Yeah, so another question is that currently for the Federation V2 pool mode, I think that I already get many comments from Paul, from Mauro, and from Irfan. So I will try to update the document continually, and I hope that I can get some comments later. Yeah.
Yeah, and Gwangya, as I just suggest, before putting the idea in the document, it will be really appreciative if you have a chat with either of us to formalize the idea, because both the documents I saw, I found some ideas to be a little premature. Like there already has been some background and some thought we did put earlier. We had many discussions around similar topics. So
Yeah.
it will make sense for you to have that information also before actually jumping into some detail in the documentation.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Yeah.
But by the way, my question is, when you suggested to check it with you, how it's prepared to work in it, to create some kind of draft and share only with the limited community, because it's easy to explain when something is writing, not just during discussion in the call. Some diagrams.
Yes, certainly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and Alexei, Gwangya, I think, I mean, you would be setting up a meeting with a couple of folks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one mode that's actually fairly effective is to put some slides together of the essence of your proposal and present it either at this meeting or at a separate one. I think we have quite a bit of spare time at these meetings if we make it. We could allocate, half an hour each one of these meetings to a design review and make sure that the person who's responsible for the design ahead of time, knows they're going to be presenting a slide deck of a couple of slides, and then we can actually have concrete decisions. Because I think assuming that everyone's read a document before and assuming that everyone knows what's in a document is something that doesn't work very successfully in my experience.
Yeah.
And it can help to save time, because to provide their slides and to discuss in the meeting, it will save the time to write in the document and all this pinpoint.
Yeah, I think ultimately you do need to write the document anyway, because not everyone can attend these meetings. So there has to be a record of what your actual plan is. But rather than assuming that everybody has read it and has commented and responded to your comments and blah, 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 it's much higher bandwidth if you can just do all of that in the meeting with slides. Just a suggestion.
No, I meant that anyway we have to write document, but when we get the comments before, it will help to save time and write its right direction. Maybe some of the design suggestions are not relevant at all.
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay, I'll see you guys in the next meeting then.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. This is a useful meeting.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.